I guess I take away mostly that we got a car that is more stable than last year, more predictable than last year. It's looking pleasingly reliable, although I need to reach around and find some wood at that point. And I think we got something we can work with.
Hi there, welcome to the Race Debrief for 2024. As you can see, we've got a slightly different setup here, but it's the same principles. You send in your questions, we'll do our best to answer them, and we'll get on to some questions from the Bahrain Grand Prix.
So our first question has come in, and it is, predictably enough, what could we learn from the first race?
Well, obviously quite a lot over the whole weekend, but it was good to get some real numbers in terms of performance, because obviously the testing, that's all based on assumptions, fuel loads, power modes, and in terms of qualifying pace, probably that looked a bit better than at the test. So obviously a bit of work was done back here trying to improve that, and it was encouraging to be reasonably close to pole. Still work to do there, but the race pace was disappointing. I think we looked better on Friday and we didn't get that quite right, so fair bit of investigation going on here. Optimistic though that the car does have pace in it. We've seen that on the Friday long runs, we've seen it in testing, but the balance that we had on the race itself on Saturday wasn't where we needed it.
Yeah, I think I learned, if I didn't already know it, once more, that Formula One is really difficult. Tiny little things can have you over quite a lot. But yeah, as you say, the promise was there at various points in the weekend and all the way through the winter testing. I guess I take away mostly that we got a car that is more stable than last year, more predictable than last year. It's looking pleasingly reliable, although I need to reach around and find some wood at that point. And I think we got something we can work with.
So James, question that's come in for you, why were our cars sparking more than the others?
Well, first of all, it's not completely sure in my head that we were sparking more than others, but maybe before answering or attempting to answer that question, I'll explain first of all why cars spark at all. This generation of cars definitely likes being near the ground. You get near the ground, you get more downforce. Trouble is, being near the ground means you are going to touch the ground at high speed when you're going over bumps. And on the underside of the car, we're permitted to have various bits of metal that protect the bottom of the car from that touching the road. And the metal that we are allowed to use is titanium. And titanium is chosen deliberately by the sport because it produces these very, very attractive sparks when it hits asphalt. So the sparking is caused by the titanium plates. The titanium plates are there to protect the underside of the car, and all of the cars are touching the road. What we do see on certain teams is that they are using different arrangements of titanium plates compared to us, and at different times of the weekend maybe they're sparking differently to us. And certainly if you were there in person watching the race, instead of seeing it on the cameras, you would see not just sparks, but you also would see plank dust. And that is a sign when different parts of the bottom of the car are touching the road, not just the skids. And certainly, if you're not seeing sparks, you're seeing plank dust. But one way or another, all these cars are heaving themselves along the road once they get up to high speeds. We heard on the radio in the race at a certain point Lewis saying his seat was broken. Bit of concern from us at that point. We also know that it caught the attention of race control, who also heard the same radio message. What actually was the situation?
Well, we obviously got the car back, checked the seat straight away, and the seat was fine. Now, the seats are obviously designed to be able to be lifted out, because in the event of an accident, the driver comes out in his seat. And ultimately, the thing that holds the seat in the car is the driver who's strapped into his seat belts. The only thing we can think is that if Lewis was ever so slightly loose, he moved a bit and maybe the seat came up, had a little bit of motion and dropped down again, because looking at it afterwards, there's no evidence that anything's broken, that it was in the wrong position. But fundamentally, that whilst it might be a bit uncomfortable for the driver if they're not really rigidly located in the car, fundamentally a failure of the seat doesn't mean that the driver can come loose. So they're always safe, but as I said, it looks like this was something very subtle, that maybe there was a bit of motion, and then it settled down and was fine for the rest of the race. This is a good one for you, James. Why were the cars overheating, and can we prevent it from happening again?
Well, that was actually it's the biggest unanswered mystery from the weekend. We were substantially hotter in the race than we expected to be. And while it's always something of a gamble choosing your cooling level for a given race weekend, because you're having to take a bet on free practice running what the weather is going to be like on a Sunday, and normally you're also making a few corrections for different power levels and other things that can vary between the race and when you're doing your practices. This particular weekend was one of the weekends where we had to make the fewest guesses possible and the fewest corrections. We'd already run this cooling level loads of times in winter testing. We'd already run these power levels in winter testing, as well as free practice. The temperature that we got on race day was incredibly close to what we predicted it would be, and therefore we had all of the circumstances to make an accurate prediction for where the temperatures would be. The fact that we got it wrong by more than 1 or 2 degrees is extremely unusual and quite punishing, because once the cars are above the limit that the engine guys will guarantee the engine to, we just have to back off the car. We have to back off the throttle at the end of the straights. We have to turn down some of the modes of the engine just to make them survive. And that just robs you of lap time, it robs you of tyre temperature, and it just ruins your race effectively. So it isn't solved yet. It's one of the things that we got a program of work this week in the factory to try to understand, of the very small number of things that could possibly have changed between free practice and race, what was it that gave rise to that unexpected temperature increase. And it will be a considerable relief when we pin that down and make sure it doesn't then happen to us again at any point this year. This overheating, which I just mentioned, it casts a long shadow over the race. I think you and your guys have taken a look at what it cost us in terms of lost lap time in the race, and where do you think we could have come out?
Well, yeah, in terms of the amount, as you know, it's quite sizable, and at its very biggest, close to around 0.3, but then we were able to manage it effectively in other areas, and particularly with free air, the loss was a bit less than that, but of the order of 1 to 2 tenths over the race per lap. Now, where would we have finished without that? Well, certainly when George lost the position to Charles, well, that was one of the regions where he was having to do a lot of this management, and that lift and coast that he was doing to cool the power unit also cools the tyres, and he was starting to struggle a bit there with understeer, complaining about the front end. So that's one position that we would have hopefully been able to hold on to. And then Lewis, well, I mean, the main issue for Lewis was we didn't qualify as well as we should have done. We got a bit caught out on the first run, ended up only having one set of new tyres for Q3. So some of his issue wasn't down to this, it was simply that he started further back. But with him, I'm pretty confident would have been ahead of the McLarens, but probably not further than that. So as well as the cooling issue, there's a bit on tyre performance, balance. There's no way that wasn't as good as it was at a lot of times in the tests and even the FP2 long run. So there's a chunk there that we need to understand as well.
We saw that Max fitted the soft tyre in the final stint of the race, whereas we went soft, hard. Would that have been an option for us? Would that actually have played out better for us if we'd done that?
I mean, the point where we decided to trigger Lewis's stop was to try and take a position off Piastri, see if we could undercut him. And at that point of the race, had Lewis gone on the soft, he would have been the longest runner on the soft. And from our calculations, what we see on the wear from stint 1, probably he would have run out of tyres by the end and likely lost the position that he gained. So it would have only been an option if we'd carried on with that middle stint on the hard, given ourselves a shorter distance to cover. And whilst, Red Bull did it very ably with both of their cars, but the situation they were in was one where they could manage and they had pace that they could sort of back off a bit, look after the tyres to make them go longer. The situation that we were facing was one of being in a bit more of a battle, having to push. You don't know whether you're going to be in traffic, trying to overtake, And for us, it just felt like going on the hard tyre was the best way to take that position, but importantly, hang on to it for the duration of the race.
So the soft tyre, good option if you're managing from the front, but if you're in a knife fight like we were.
Yeah, and if we had a
no
shorter stint at the end, then we would have definitely been talking about it, but not for probably another 4 laps beyond where we made the change. As you know, Bahrain is a bit of an outlier circuit. Very difficult for the rear tyres. With a perfect setup at some of the other circuits to come, do you think we can be more competitive?
I absolutely think we can be more competitive. I maybe would think of it less in terms of outliers or not. At this time of year, you're not really thinking so much in terms of outliers. Almost every track you go to feels like an outlier because it's a brand new car and you are learning quite a lot with each track you arrive at, what that car needs and how to coax the best from it. So it is true that Bahrain is an unusual track with very abrasive asphalt, with relatively few high-speed corners and a preponderance of low speed. But Jeddah is an outlier in its own way as well. It has far more high-speed content than is the norm. Melbourne, similar sort of deal, where it's probably one of the more aerodynamic circuits of the whole year, even though it's a sort of notionally a street circuit. So all of these early season tracks are a voyage of discovery. We absolutely didn't get the best from the car in Bahrain. The understeer that we had, specifically or especially with the hard tyre, cost us dearly. The overheating added another 10-12 seconds worth of penalty to our race. So our focus for these next couple is to arrive in Jeddah and then in turn in Melbourne with setups that we hope will suit the particular needs of those tracks, with upgrades that we hope to bring from the factory to sort of boost our chances further, and with luck to come home delighted with the fact that we've produced on the Sunday, or the Saturday in the case of Jeddah, the sort of performances that we've seen in free practice, rather than lamenting the fact that the promise of the previous weekend wasn't delivered on race day.
Wrapping up this episode, the next question's looking forward to the next race in Jeddah. So what do we expect from the team?
I hope sincerely that we will deliver a car that has the correct cooling level. I hope that we will get the qualifying and race balance in a place where the drivers are complimentary about its sweet handling, rather than being rather critical about it being difficult to manhandle around the corners. And I'm looking forward to seeing whether we can make the shift from a very rear limited track, a track that's very traditionally rear limited like Bahrain, to a track like Jeddah, which asks more questions on the front axle and is a high energy track where you're definitely having to look after both front and rear axles in a range of really quite daunting high-speed corners. So I'm just looking for a clean weekend, no reliability hassles, good pit stops, get the tyres in a sweet window, and hopefully just reveal what the car can do. So no pressure on you, Shov, but that's what I'm hoping for.
And we've got quite a lot of work going on in the simulator, as you know. But yeah, Bahrain, a lot of testing, a lot of time to play with the setup, and then now we're down to the 3 hours of free practice to land it in the right place. But we're doing everything we can to put ourselves in a good position.